Deku, I think he's some pro. By clouds. My head in the clouds not coming down. Chapter 50. Anticipation. Shota started straightening his desk as his students rushed out the door at the end of the day. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Deku talking to Uraraka briefly before piling with her at the door and walking back into the classroom. Ida hadn't been leaving with them in the last few days, which was strange, but unfortunately not unexpected, considering what he was going through. Instead of getting something he'd forgotten at his desk, like Shota had expected, Deku made a beeline for him, grinning. So, tonight's the big night, huh? Shota sighed.
How did you even know about that?
I know everything, Deku said innocently. Didn't you know? Shota deadpanned, and Deku laughed. Fine. Jo couldn't shut up about it. She even started a new chat without you in it, just so she had a place to scream.
Of course she did,
Shota muttered. Deku sat down on the desk and started kicking his legs out like a little kid. So, where are you taking her?
Like I'm gonna tell you that.
Shota glared at him.
You'll try and follow us and get pictures for blackmail purposes.
Me? Never. Deku paused thoughtfully. Brave totally would, though. Shota resisted the urge to roll his eyes.
Exactly. Even Emmy doesn't know where we're going yet, so it would be utterly illogical to tell you just so that you can post it in the group chat.
All right, keep your secrets. Deku stood and adjusted his backpack. But for the record, if I did follow, you wouldn't even know I was there. Considering you're the one that did my stealth training, if you noticed, it would kind of be your own fault. Shota glared at him, making Deku laugh again. Fine! I promise I won't tag along on your date. But at least tell me you're planning on cleaning up a little bit. Shota raised an eyebrow.
And what's wrong with what I usually wear?
Deku shrugged awkwardly. It's just a little grungy?
No offense, Deku, but I'm not about to take fashion advice from someone who thinks ironically labeled t-shirts are high fashion.
I never claimed they were high fashion, Deku grumbled. But please don't wear sweats on the first date.
So I can wear them on the second?
Oh, so you want there to be a second? Shota opened his mouth to respond before closing it again and frowning, hoping that Deku would miss his blush. From the satisfied look on Deku's face, however, he hadn't been so lucky.
For your information, I was actually planning on cleaning up a little bit. Not that it actually matters. Emmy has seen me coming off a month-long mission where I haven't slept for 3 days. So logically, it doesn't matter how I look tonight because she's already seen me at my worst.
Aw. Deku smiled softly. That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard.
Shut up before I expel you.
Shota grabbed his sleeping bag from under his desk and headed towards the door.
Shouldn't you be trying to catch up to Uraraka? At this rate, she'll beat you to the station.
Deku's eyes widened, and he stammered out a goodbye as he rushed towards the door. But he paused with his hand on the doorframe. Oh, and Eraser? Don't break her heart. Deku ran down the hall, leaving Shota frozen back in the classroom. It wasn't her heart he was worried about. Otako walked to the train station alone for the first time since coming to UA. It wasn't that she minded being alone, but, well, Ida had been practically avoiding them since the sports festival, and Deku had said he needed to talk to Aizawa about something. She hoped it wasn't anything bad. She knew they were close, but There was still a part of her that worried Deku was in trouble or something. It was just that Aizawa was so scary. He'd threatened to expel someone on the first day, and she could never really tell what he was thinking. He was just so strict that Ochako couldn't help being concerned for one of her best friends. She didn't think she'd ever understand how Deku actually became friends with their teacher. But then again, Deku was really brave. The way he strategized against Aizawa that first day, and even stood against the villains at the USJ. He was always doing things that should be impossible with nothing but his brains, like when he destroyed the obstacle course at the sports festival. She hadn't really got the chance to tell him yet, but part of the reason she was able to go so hard in her fight against Bakugo was because of how Deku had inspired her in the first 2 rounds and made her feel like anything was possible. And he did all that without a quirk. The sound of footsteps behind her startled Ochako from her thoughts, and she whipped around to see Deku running towards her. She smiled as she waited for him to catch up. Looked like she wouldn't be walking alone after all. Sorry about that, Deku panted. Ready to go? Uraraka nodded. Is everything okay? What did you need to talk to Aizawa about? Nothing important, just... Well, I shouldn't really talk about it without his permission. If you're trying to make me worry less, you're not doing very well, she pouted. Sorry. Deku smiled sheepishly. It's nothing bad, I promise. If you say so. Ochako huffed. So, what do you think of the essay Midnight assigned? It's killer, right? Shota fiddled with his bun again as he walked the last block to Emi's apartment. Despite what he'd told Deku, he wasn't sure what he was supposed to wear on a date. He hadn't really bothered with socialization much since... He shook his head. He really shouldn't be thinking about Shirakumo tonight. Though, if he was still around, he'd probably be teasing Shota relentlessly that he was finally going out with a girl. But he hadn't even wanted friends after that, so a girlfriend had been completely out of the question. It didn't help his nerves that Shota knew how bad his fashion sense was. He had more sweatpants in his closet than should probably be legal, and it had taken him almost half an hour of digging until he found a pair of jeans that didn't look too worn out. They still had a few holes in them, and the black had faded to a dark grey, but they still looked acceptable, and they were soft enough that Shota wouldn't be uncomfortable the whole night, which was a necessity. He'd debated whether he should wear a t-shirt or something nicer before finally just throwing on a dark blue button-up that Yamada had gotten him for his birthday a few years back. Emi was very fashion-forward, and the last thing he wanted to do was embarrass her, so erring on the side of nicer was probably his best bet. By the time he'd finally finished getting dressed, it had almost been time to leave, so he just pulled his hair back into a messy bun at the nape of his neck and called it good. As much as he knew it was illogical to worry about his appearance, he hoped it was enough. He took a deep breath before stepping up to the door and knocking. He could have just had Emi meet him at the cafe, but Recovery Girl had spent the last week since learning of Emi's existence trying to literally knock some respect for tradition into his head, so he was picking her up. They'd take the train together and then... His train of thought was interrupted when Emi opened the door. She looked at him in shock, and Shota was starting to wonder what he'd done wrong when she smiled. Well, you clean up nice, don't you? Shota swallowed thickly. You too. Emi laughed and closed the door behind her. You're cute. So, where are we going? She'd opted for a light pink dress with a ruffled skirt that fell just above her knees, and a halter neckline that was perfect for a warm evening. If Shota was being absolutely honest, she looked really good. Shota forced himself to stop staring and offered her his arm, like Recovery Girl insisted he do. Emi looked surprised, but took his arm with a smile and let him lead her down the sidewalk. We're going to one of my favorite cafes, actually.
I hope you like cats.
Wait. Emmy stopped walking and dramatically brought one hand to her chest. Is the ever-stoic eraser really taking me to a cat cafe?
Are you done? He deadpanned.
Almost. Emmy grinned. I didn't know you were such a softie, Shorter. He rolled his eyes.
Yes, I'm sure. Because the way we practically adopted a teenager wasn't a dead giveaway.
Well, in your defense, Deku is pretty cute.
He had potential.
Emmy giggled. And we're back. Nice to know there's a heart of gold buried underneath all that cold rationality.
And underneath that, it's a smaller, more shriveled heart incapable of human emotion.
You're a real riot, Shota, you know that? Emmy slapped him lightly on the arm, and Shota wondered if hearts were supposed to skip beats like that. He should ask recovery goal, because that couldn't be healthy. It just seemed so illogical to have a body respond to attraction like that.
It's in Naruhata, so we have to take the train. Is that alright?
Emmy nodded, and they walked the rest of the way to the train station in comfortable silence. Chapter 51. First Date. Shota frowned as they crammed onto the crowded train. He wished they could have avoided rush hour, but it wasn't rational to change the whole date just to avoid strangers on the train. That didn't mean he had to like it. Shota, your face. Emmy giggled.
What's wrong with my face?
You look like a grumpy old cat. Emmy grinned. You really are a misanthrope, aren't you? Shota sent her a mock glare.
I am not a misanthrope. I just don't like people.
That is literally the definition of a misanthrope.
No, a misanthrope is someone who hates people. I just severely dislike them.
You hate reporters?
Yes, well, when you learn a word for a hatred of reporters besides common sense, let me know.
Shota reached up and grabbed a hold of the bar to steady himself as the train started moving. Emmy was quite a bit shorter, so she opted to keep a hold of Shota's arm instead. Emmy looked up at him and rolled her eyes. Just admit it, Shota. You don't like people, and therefore you are a misanthrope.
I like you, don't I?
Emmy's face went bright red, and Shota's followed suit as soon as he realized exactly what he said. He cleared his throat and started looking anywhere but at her face. Deku would enjoy all the different quirks on this train, right? If he were here, he'd probably be analyzing. That was pretty smooth. Shota looked down and saw Emmy smiling sweetly at him, which only made his blush more intense. He wished he'd brought his capture weapon so he could use to hide, but no dice.
Oh,
Thanks, he responded eloquently. Emmy laughed. Look at us, acting like a pair of teenage idiots. How many times have we seen our students' poor attempt at flirting, yet here we are making all the same mistakes? Shota cocked his eyebrows.
You mean steadfastly ignoring each other, only to stare at each other's backs the moment they turn away?
Yes. The train jostled slightly, and Emmy tightened her grip on his arm. There were these two students in my homeroom last year, and literally everyone knew they liked each other. Every interaction ended in one of them blushing and running away, but they were still too dense to realize it. We'd even tease them about it, trying to push them together, but they were idiots. It drove me crazy.
Did they ever get together?
Shota gulped as Emmy smiled mischievously. Yep.
Do I even want to ask?
It's not that bad, Shota, Emmy whined. But let's just say that locking the supply closet so neither of them could run away did wonders. Shota laughed in spite of himself.
I can see Nezu doing that to our students. It's a fairly simple solution to the problem.
Simple, but effective. Emi nodded and grinned. Glad that it didn't come to that with us, though.
Oh?
Shota cocked one eyebrow.
Do you not remember Midoriya trapping us on the shopping trip together?
She shoved him slightly with her shoulder. That's just standard wingmanning. Shota rolled his eyes.
You didn't need his help to confess your feelings.
What made you think he was helping me? Emi glanced up at him, and Shota's eyes widened.
That's not... What?
Emi started laughing again. You're so cute. You're so easy to tease, Shota.
Shut up.
Shota grumbled.
It's not fair.
Too bad, Emi said in mock seriousness. The world is full of unfairness. It's a hero's job to combat that unfairness. He glared at her.
You can't quote me just to make fun of me.
Just did. She pulled him down by his collar. So, what are you gonna do about it? Next stop, Naruhata Center. Shota jolted slightly as the train came to a stop.
This is us.
Emi pouted slightly, but let go, and followed the trickle of people getting off the train. Shota didn't even have to think as he led her down the familiar streets. He glanced down at her, unsure of what to say after that moment on the train. She hadn't reached up to take his arm again either, which meant that he probably messed things up. Dang it. Maybe he should... Didn't you spend a few years here before you started teaching? Emi's voice cut through his spiral and forced himself to take a deep breath. He nodded and pointed to one of the side streets they were passing.
Over there is where I met the crawler for the first time. He was a good kid. A bit misguided sometimes, but he and the other vigilantes did a lot of good around here.
Emi smiled, and Shota gradually relaxed again, as she kept asking questions until he found himself almost rambling about his time in Naruhara. It didn't take long at all for them to reach their destination, which was just on the edge of the warehouse district. He was about to lead her inside when she stopped and stared at the giant building. Are you sure this is a cafe, Shota? She asked hesitantly. There's no way a cat cafe would be so big. You're not just gonna lead me into a warehouse to kill me, right? Shota chuckled.
It'll make sense once we're inside. I promise.
She looked at him skeptically, but took his hand and let herself be pulled into the cafe. Inside, dozens of people lounged on various levels of the cafe, and the cats particularly seemed to like having a lot of vertical space to explore. A few of the older cats immediately came up to Shota and started batting at his pant legs and sniffing to see if he'd brought them any treats. Hey, Eraser! Long time no see. The cats missed you. Emi's eyes widened as she caught sight of the giant mantis of an employee who was greeting them with a smile. If she'd met him on the street, she probably would have been intimidated just by his sheer size, but he oddly didn't seem out of place among the cats and the quaint atmosphere of the cafe.
I can see that, Kiruhito.
Spoiled brats, Shota said fondly.
How's business?
Booming as ever. Wait, who... Kiruhito blinked a few times as he took in Emi and his eyes zeroed in on their joined hands. Oh, you on a date? Shota scowled.
Maybe this was a bad...
Yo, Takobe, get in here! Eraser's on a date! Emi laughed so hard that she started snorting, as a massive man with an octopus quirk threw open the doors to the kitchen and made a beeline for them, as Shota started to pull back out of the cafe. Emmy simply tightened her grip on his hand and widened her stance to anchor herself in place.
Oh my god!
Takobe grinned and bowed to Emmy, making her laugh harder.
You have tamed the beast. I didn't think I'd ever see the day. You must be some kind of miracle worker, miss. We need to tell the Hotta brothers. They're not going to believe this.
I already texted them, Kiruhito said. They're on their way.
Either give us a table or get out, Shota said irritably.
Of course, Kiruhito said. We've got the perfect table for you two lovebirds if you're okay with the stairs. One of the upper-level seats, perfect for little people like you. He led them to a small staircase that led up to a tiny balcony that was just big enough for a table for two. It was also at the intersection of several of the cat walkways that ran around the walls, so cats were constantly running around and jumping onto the small platform and taking the staircase down to the floor. The balcony was only about 10 feet off the ground, though, so Kiruhito was able to stand on the main level and see their table to take their order if he stood up to his full height. Once she and Shota were seated, Kiruhito leaned over towards Amy conspiratorially. I've got to say, miss, you've got yourself a real catch once you get past that ugly frown on his face. She smiled at Shota, who was still scowling, even though his face was pink with embarrassment. Oh, I know. Did you know that he gave us our first cat? Emmy gasped with delight. I did not. I remember one time.
Thank you, Shota said suddenly. I'll have the black brew, and she'll have the calico combo. Now go.
Kiruhito winked at her, but left, and Shota slammed his head down on the table.
I shouldn't have brought you here.
Oh no, coming here was definitely the right decision. Emmy couldn't bring herself to stop smiling, even when Shota started glaring at her.
You're incorrigible.
Aw, but you love me anyways. Shota blushed and pretended to be reading the menu, despite the fact that they had already ordered. She thought she'd enjoyed teasing him when all she got from it was glares, but this was even better. After a few minutes of this, she decided to finally take pity on him and change the subject. So, this cafe is so big because of the staff, right? Shota nodded.
Yeah. Kiruhito was always complaining about how he couldn't really fit anywhere because he was so big. Mostly because he just wanted an axe to grind, but then he met Takobe and the rest was history. They try to hire people with larger builds to give them opportunities that they wouldn't have anywhere else, and they've even converted some of the surrounding warehouses into giant apartments that they manage. They've done well for themselves here.
If I didn't know any better, I'd almost say you were proud of them. Shota scoffed, but a slight smile gave him away.
Well then, I guess it's a good thing you know better.
What a softie. It was at that moment that Kiruhito returned with their drinks and a small bag of treats to feed the cats. The drinks were so cute. Emmy quickly took out her phone and snapped a picture, and then extended her arm to take a selfie. Smile, Shota. Shota frowned.
I don't smile.
Kiruhito grinned at Emmy, then picked up one of the cats that was running past and plopped it on top of Shota's head, right as Emmy snapped the picture. The resulting disgruntled expression wasn't a smile, but it was funny enough to make up for it. Emmy didn't waste any time typing out a message and sending the picture to the group chat. Shota's phone vibrated, and he looked down at the notifications before turning to her with the most done look on his face.
Seriously? You had to send him that one?
Well, you could have smiled.
That would have arguably been worse.
Amy laughed. Oh, yes, because you still like to pretend you have a reputation to uphold.
I do have a reputation to uphold.
Around us? Your closest friends? She giggled, Sorry, short of it. That ship sailed a long time ago.
Shota's eyes narrowed. And what makes you so sure of that?
Emi smiled and took a sip of her drink. Kitten pajamas. Shota's eyes widened in shock before he scowled.
That little...
Emi laughed again. I think it's cute. Shota groaned and buried his face in the cat that had moved from his head to his lap.
People used to respect me.
But wouldn't you rather have friends than respect? Emi asked innocently. Shota glared at her.
That depends on what you say next.
You're just too fun to tease, Shota. Shota looked at her for a moment before taking out his phone. Emi leaned forward to try and get a look at the screen, but he stood up to keep it out of her reach. What are you doing?
The thing you forgot, Amy, is that relationships go both ways.
Emi felt her stomach drop. Had she teased too much? What if she ruined it? Was Shota really just gonna leave her there? They were never gonna have a second date, much less get married, and were their friends? She was knocked out of her thoughts as a cat landed on her head. She looked up at Shota, who was staring at her with a self-satisfied smirk on her face, and then felt her phone vibrate. The picture that he had just sent to the group chat captured her shock expression perfectly, and she couldn't help it as she dissolved into giggles. Touché, Ariza. Touché. The cat jumped off her lap and onto the ground, and Amy ended up following, grabbing one of the cat toys that was on the table and pushing back her chair so that she had room to sit on the ground as the cat pounced on the feather she was dangling in front of it. Shota smiled as he watched Amy play with the cat, then grabbed the cat treats and started throwing them down near her until she was surrounded by half a dozen cats, climbing all over her as she pet them and played with them. How did he get so lucky to get a girl like her? He stopped dead in his thoughts, Amy blissfully unaware of the mini-crisis he was having just a few feet away. What was that? Well, yes, he liked her, but she was the one who had flirted with him first. It wasn't like he was just the luckiest man in the world that she chose him, and it definitely wasn't that he loved her or anything. Oh no. He hadn't signed up for this. Shota? Shota, you okay? He shook himself out of his spiral and saw Amy looking at him, concerned. The cats around her, batting at her, trying to get her to play again. He must have spaced out longer than he thought. Shota? She asked again. What's wrong? There were a lot of things he could say that would be logical responses. Unfortunately, his brain-to-mouth filter chose that moment to fail spectacularly.
It's unfair of you to seduce me with cats.
She stared at him for a long moment before she started laughing. You're the one that brought me here. If anything, you're the one seducing me.
Wait! Artman Eraser is actually seducing someone? Oh man, I thought those guys were just playing a joke.
Shota tore his eyes away from Amy to see the Hoto brothers, grinning at them from the top of the stairs. Oh no. He really shouldn't have chosen this place for their first date. Oh man, to think that our main annoyance has an annoyance of his own, one of them said, wiping a fake tear from his eye. A little nuisance is growing up, the other said. We're so proud.
Okay, we're leaving.
Amy laughed and let Shota help her up. It's always a pleasure to meet Shota's friends. I knew he couldn't be a grumpus all of the time. Shorter left a few bills on the table to cover the cost of the coffee, before pushing her towards the door, the others following and taking pictures to get photographic evidence of the impossible. As they reached the door, Amy turned around and waved. "See you again soon."
"No, we won't," Shota muttered. "I'm never going to be able to show my face there again."
Oh, stop being so dramatic, Shota. It was fun. He sighed.
Fine. It wasn't absolutely terrible. Happy?
She leaned up to kiss him on the cheek and smiled as he blushed. Very. Shota cleared his throat and checked the time on his phone.
There's a train that leaves in 15 minutes. We should hurry if we don't want to miss it.
Lead the way. They walked back through the streets of Naruhata much more comfortably than they had the first time. At some point, Amy had reached over and grabbed Shota's hand, and he hadn't let go yet, so she was going to count that as a win. Then, as they were passing one of the shopping districts, everything exploded. Literally. Hey, it's Mika. If you enjoyed this podfic, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel or following me on Spotify for updates and new content weekly. Also, consider supporting me on Ko-Fi, link in the description. Anyways, I hope that you have a great day or night, and that your favorite author posts the exact fanfiction you visualized when you were meant to be doing work yesterday. Until next time.